22 days after Todd Geib disappeared while walking home from a party in Casnovia, Michigan, his body was found standing upright in a private lake right in the middle of an area that had already been thoroughly searched. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you know what to do. Let's get started. 22-year-old Todd Geib seemed to have everything going for him. He was a kind, fun-loving family man who enjoyed outdoor activities and sports. He is described as friendly, smart, and outgoing by everyone that knew him. But on Saturday, June 11, 2005, at around 7:30 p.m., Todd left the apartment he was sharing with his cousin to go to a bar and grill to meet up with some of his friends, who he would leave with at around 9:30 p.m. They were heading to this all-night keg party being held by a nearby apple orchard, which was about 2 miles north of White Road in Casnovia, Michigan, and it was located just about 1.5 miles from where he lived. It seems that around 12:45 in the morning, things were getting a little bit rowdy at the party. There was a fight that had broken out, and perhaps it was going to transform into a full-on brawl. And this seems to have made Todd want to leave, so he left the party on foot, and he called the friend who had dropped him off there to let him know that he was on his way home. He left a message for his friend saying that he was going to head back to his cousin's place, and nobody really thought much of that since it was nearby and he was familiar with the area. But things would get inherently strange from here. From 12:47 a.m. to around 12:57 a.m., Todd made a series of phone calls that were a bit odd. In one call to a friend, he said, "I've had enough." And then in another, he said, "I'm in a field," before the phone went dead. That friend would call back because clearly they were concerned for Todd's safety at this point. And the phone did pick up, but all she could hear was what sounded like heavy breathing or maybe the rushing of wind before the call cut out again. And from that point forward, the phone was not used again. And after that, no calls went through. Unfortunately, this would be the last time anyone heard from Todd, and he would go missing. Of course, a massive search started to find out where Todd was and what happened to him. They would scour the orchard and the area around that party, and of course the stretch of road where he was supposedly walked home that evening. And apparently, police officers would search this area thoroughly 3 different times. It was starting to look like Todd had simply vanished off the face of the earth. And then strangely enough, on July 2nd, 2005, the missing body of 22-year-old Todd Geib was found in a private lake in Michigan. His body was found standing upright in this private lake, pretty much in the middle of the area that had already been thoroughly searched. But this case only gets stranger. His remains only had little decomposition, and his clothing appeared to be completely clean from water debris. Police would conclude that Todd was intoxicated when he left the party, wandered into the lake, and then drowned. So his death was ultimately ruled an undetermined drowning. But when Todd's mother, Kathy, saw a recovery photo of her son, she immediately disagreed with local law enforcement's theories. Kathy would go on to say, "He was not in the condition to be in there 3 weeks. I did my research and found out what condition people would be like if they were in the water for 3 weeks." According to the autopsy report, Todd's remains only had moderate decomposition, and his clothing appeared to be fairly clean of algal biofilm, which is a thin slime film of bacteria often found on the surface of various bodies of water. Also, there was no mention of insects, debris, or sand on the body. And I'm sure most of you heard that I noted his body was found floating vertically in the lake. That's incredibly unusual for a drowning victim. An independent investigation revealed that while Todd had been missing for 3 weeks at the point that he was found, he had only been dead for about 2 to 5 days before he was found. The autopsy showed that Todd had no water in his lungs at all, which meant that he was likely placed in the water while he was already dead. But this wasn't enough to change the Michigan State Police's mind. They still ruled his case an undetermined drowning. They said that he left the party intoxicated and happened to come across the water, went into the lake, and drown. A new team of investigators had a completely different theory. They believed that Todd was abducted, held on land for a sordid period of time. He was then murdered and placed in the lake. And then they would say that they further believed Todd was a possible victim of the smiley face killers. The smiley face killers are this alleged network of basically unknown serial killers that supposedly target college-aged men and dump their bodies in nearby waterways before leaving graffiti smileys at the death sites. This team would instantly start their investigation. They noted that because Todd's head was exposed in the water, that there should be insects in the clothing, the mouth, and even in the ears or the folds of the skin, because that's where these flies typically would lay their eggs. They said that these flies are evolved to be attracted to dead things within minutes to hours to even a day. He would say that the carcasses are typically consumed pretty quickly and dramatically. So the three on this investigation team would visit the lake where Todd was recovered, and they concluded that if a body was here, it would be colonized with some type of aquatic insect rather quickly. To test this theory and determine if Todd was in the water for 3 weeks, as police originally theorized, they would decide to place swine carcasses into an experimental pond for 3 weeks dressed in clothing that resembled Todd's outfit. And they said swine carcasses are really similar in terms of the way they decompose. So they would replicate the case using 5 pig carcasses, and they would sample 3 every other day and leave 2 of them untouched for the entirety of the 21-day experiment. It turns out the carcass collected aquatic insects within the first day, and by day 3, the insects had laid eggs. On day 21, the carcass completely collapsed from insect activity, and the clothes were covered in thick green biofilm algal layers. And if you remember, they saw none of this stuff on Todd's shirt. One of the investigators on the team would go on to say, "Given our experiment, I find it very surprising that Todd's body had no reported insect activity and the clothing had no algal development. Based on our study, it is unlikely that his clothing and his body had been in there for 21 days. So this new team of investigators firmly believes that Todd was put in the water shortly before he was found. It appears that he had no external injuries, but some suggest that he had a blood alcohol content of 0.12, and this really led, authorities to believe that he had gone to the party, gotten drunk, he left to go wander around and go home, and then somehow found himself, out in the lake, drunk, and then drowned. But as we know, typical drowning victims are found, and again, typically face down in the water. So it's just very eerie that somehow this body was, upright, just kind of standing eerily in the water. I mean, it's kind of a terrifying picture. The family, of course, is questioning why, if this is what happened, he got drunk, he wandered into the water, why was he fully clothed? And why was there no water in his lungs? Why were there no insects? Why, was there no sign of decomposition? Because of these experiments, it really heavily suggests that Todd didn't die by, this drunken misadventure theory. It really points to the theory that he was abducted and murdered. Yet the Michigan State Police still have not reopened the case. I did find somewhere that there were traces of antidepressants in his system, although Todd had never been prescribed these, and it's unknown as to why he had taken them or what connection they had in this case. Though we should note it's very possible that Todd was given them against his will, and apparently some of the side effects of the pills found were hallucinations, confusion, agitation, cardiac arrest, coma, and seizures. So of course, that's incredibly suspicious. So I want to go back to the night that he went missing. I find it strange that between 12:47 and 12:57 a.m., he made these series of phone calls. He made one call saying he's had enough, which perhaps he just meant the party, it was getting out of control, he wanted to go home, he's had enough, he's on his way home. And then in another one, he simply said, "I'm in a field." And then that friend who was concerned called back. The phone picked up and all she could hear was, what sounded like heavy breathing or maybe the rushing of wind before the call cut out. I'm more inclined to say that, when Todd called and he said, "I'm in a field," first of all, perhaps he had gotten lost on his way home because perhaps he was drinking and he was drunk, and that would be normal, something normal that would happen. But when she called back and all she heard was maybe heavy breathing or the rush of the wind, I'm more inclined to say, if we're going with that murder theory, perhaps Todd did stumble and, meet somebody in that field who, hit him or attacked him, and Todd went to answer the phone and all she could hear is this, heavy breathing. I also think that 21 or 22 days later, when his body was found and is standing upright in this lake, but he had only been dead for about 2 to 5 days beforehand, that's just incredibly terrifying. What was happening for those 21 to 22 days? Was he, being held captive? I mean, where was he for that time before he was probably placed in that lake? And let's go back to this whole smiley face murder theory. So this whole smiley face murder theory is a theory that a New York City detective Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, as well as a criminal justice professor, Dr. Lee Gilbertson. They allege that 45 young men found dead in bodies of water across several Midwestern American states from 1990s to the 2010s didn't accidentally drown, as law enforcement agencies had been concluding, but they were in fact victims of a serial killer or killers. The whole smiley face supposedly became connected to the alleged murders when it was made public that the police had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near locations where they think the killer dumped the bodies in at least a dozen of the cases. But really, most people are very skeptical of this conclusion. Either way, this is just an incredibly strange case. When you look at every little detail that happened that night, it's really hard to believe that Todd just walked into the water and drowned. It's more likely that he was abducted or something happened to him and he disappeared for 21 or 22 days and then, he was placed dead in the water. But what happened to Todd? I'd love to know your guys' thoughts on this case. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you next week.